So hi everybody, and welcome to the second Maritime SheEO conference. It's such a pleasure to be here today for a second year running, a very important and key conference for our industry and for empowering diversity. And thank you, of course, to Sanjam and her amazing team for putting this together for a second year running. In this session, we will be discussing a very important topic. I'm Gina Panayotou, the founder of Oceans Arena, and joining me today to discuss women in media and why media plays an important role to highlight female role models is Carleen Walker, the Chief Evolution Officer of SHIPPINGInsight, Nidaa, the Shipping Senior Markets Reporter at Lloyd, Manoj Venunath, Senior Deputy Editor at Hindu Business Lines, Terpilowski, who's the Managing Director of Image Range Communications and Worcester International Public Press Officer, and Holly Birkett, of course, a reporter from the Tradewinds, a shipping reporter from the Tradewinds. So without further ado, I've got a stellar lineup of panelists who will be able to discuss this very key topic. I'll give the platform to you, starting off with whether the media is doing enough to promote gender diversity, especially, of course, within the maritime sector. Carleen, since you're the only one unmuted, I think maybe you can go first.
Oh, I'm happy to, Gina. Thank you very much. And I'm also grateful to Sanjam for including me this year. In addition to my role as Chief Evolution Officer of SHIPPINGInsight, which is the fleet optimization and innovation platform for shipping, I'm also CEO and founder of Morgan Marketing Communications. So I've been doing media relations in the maritime space for well over, well, we won't go there, but many decades at any rate. And I'm also the co-founder and executive director of NAMEPA, the North American Marine Environment Protection Association. I have a spectrum of activities, everything relating to shipping, because I love this industry. And it's important for me to put that up front, is that I think this is the most integrally important industry on the planet. We are the engine of global trade. We transport more than 90% of the world's goods and services, and we do it in the most environmentally benign and cost-effective way possible. We truly are part of, I think, the most critically important industry on the planet. Now, because we're an industry and because historically this has been a male industry, the growth and the progress of women in our industry is a slow one, and it's an incremental one. And I think it's important for us to recognize the achievements of women in our industry, both onboard vessels and shoreside. And when you look at women like Angeliki Frangou, like Lois Zabraki, Elizabeth Grieg, we've also got Semiramis Paliou. I mean, there are a number of women that are leading shipping enterprises today. And there are a number of women coming up right behind them or supporting them. And then on board vessels, in the United States anyway, a lot of our maritime academies are touting the fact that they are now attracting 20, 25, 30% women into the academies to be trained to go on board ships and be trained in the industry in general. So the numbers are growing. But in terms of, is the media doing enough? I take the position that it is our response. If we don't believe they are, then it's our responsibility to change that. I don't think the responsibility of the press is to put any particular focus on gender diversity. I feel that the responsibility is ours to promote the stories that make news. I think it's important for women and for men, if they choose, to promote the stories about women's achievements, to promote the stories of opportunities for women in this industry, and for us to be our own advocates. One of the hallmarks of women, and it was in Sheryl Sandberg's book, Leaning In, is that women are not their own best promoters. We feel that in order for us to apply for a job, we need 5 out of the 5 characteristics, where if a man has 2, he'll apply for the job. Oftentimes women get in the way of tooting their own horn and I think unnecessarily so. We are doing a lot, and in this industry, we're adding a lot of value to this industry. So I think it's up to us to tell those stories. And I hope that when we do tell those stories, the media will be receptive.
I fully agree with that. And that's also something we'll be discussing later on how we can maybe do this. I think now maybe I'll put Manoj on the spot, being from the mainstream media and the only male on this panel. It would be quite interesting to hear what his perspective is on whether the media is doing enough to promote gender diversity.
Well, good evening to everybody. My name is Manoj. I'm with the Hindu Business Line newspaper. I've been tracking maritime for about maybe 20 years now here in India. So fairly familiar with how industry is doing. And I think the media, if you ask me, hasn't been doing a great, a great job of promoting gender in the maritime sector. That's also because we don't have very many people tracking this very key critical infrastructure sector here in India. So maritime makes news primarily when there is an accident, there is an oil spill, there is some crew being hijacked somewhere, abroad. So then all of us, starts, making a big hue and cry. But otherwise, I think, it's also a sector, unfortunately, which has not been tracked by the mainstream media here in India. And it's a very unfortunate situation, because this is a key sector where more than 90% of India's trade moves by the sea. Unfortunately, this is how the situation is. Even though the government has been trying, its best to just kind of encourage more women participation in the maritime sector. I think somewhere down the line there is an issue about perceptual issues about the gender diversity. Basically, this has often been seen as a very highly male-dominated industry. So breaking the glass ceiling is a bit tough. There are a lot of issues there. There have been individuals who have broken that ceiling and have tried to make a mark, but it's very, very hard, very, very few. So I guess unless there is a concerted effort by from the industry and the people, the women involved, they have to come forward in larger numbers and through some advocacy or with more participation in the industry fora and things like that. I think that is how it should go forward.
Definitely, the industry does suffer from a PR crisis, but hopefully we will be changing that going forward. So this discussion is quite crucial. Thank you very much, Manoj. Sue, would you like to share your thoughts next?
Well, I suppose I'm not as optimistic as Carleen was. I think it's mixed. I think there are things that gender is certainly coming up in the maritime industry and being talked about in a way that the industry is reacting to just what's happening in the global picture. But I'm not sure it's really embracing what gender diversity can bring to the maritime industry. So there's a lot of talk about, we need more women, we need to do this, we need to do that. But it's not actually then saying, well, what is that going to actually do to enhance the industry? And if you look at things like McKinsey's, the business impact of having a diverse company just tells on the bottom line. There is a profitability issue here of how it actually helps companies. And that story isn't being told. Also, we have recently in the last 2 years where a female was promoted to managing director. And it started off that she was a mother of 4, that she had these various other interests outside of maritime. And oh, by the way, she's just become managing director of a very large PLC. They would not do that if they were reporting about a man being appointed. So there are some unconscious biases of how women are projected in our industry, but we're getting much, much better. And I think we are now as a catalyst of change. We're in an industry which is a technical and industrial type of industry, and all these industries, whether you're in engineering, whether you're in aerospace, are now realizing there is a massive shortage of people wanting to come into our sector. And those that are coming into our sector, the new generation, they won't tolerate the things that have happened in our industry in the past. So I think we have a fantastic opportunity to reset and realign ourselves and become more inclusive. But I don't agree with the fact that we should say it's a woman captain of a ship or it's a woman third mate or whatever, because they're just a third mate, they're a captain of a ship. And until we have this inclusive language where we don't stereotype, we're not going to actually move forward. So women should be just intrinsically part of the industry and shouldn't be sort of sectioned out. And I think the media do have a good part to play in this. Technically speaking, most media want stories that are stories, and a good news story is very hard to get into the press. And I know we're going to this later on. So there is a mixture and balance here, but I think there are lots of good journalists out there who are really keen to help the industry move on. There's some fantastic stories that have been written in a number of the key press, but we are therefore also only talking to ourselves. We need to get these messages out to the people that are not reading the maritime press, because if we want to get more women in our industry, the chances of them sitting on a train or a plane reading Lloyd's List or Sea Trade or something is just very, very remote. So we need to actually get our story out to the mainstream press. And that is a harder message to deliver.
True, very true. Having said that, though, we are very lucky to have on the panel today two of these journalists who are working, at least within the maritime sector, to promote gender diversity. Nidaa and Holly, would you like to go on next in sharing your thoughts on this?
Well, I think I'm drawing on what Carleen and Sue have already said. I don't think it's really our job to be promoting diversity within maritime, but what we can do is we can write stories that highlight some of the issues to bring about some sort of change in mentality. So we can write about those successful female executives who have, risen to the ranks, for example. But at the same time, there are so few women working in the industry that it's kind of very difficult to do. So, for example, I cover dry bulk markets, and within that particular segment, there are very few women that I could interview, and some of those who I have interviewed in the past, they've either left the industry and gone somewhere else or become media shy. So, having said that, we will write stories as and when we can. We regularly write on the topic. So, for example, Sue mentioned the McKinsey report. I actually covered that based on a webinar, and it was good to see that the story was widely read and shared on social media channels. So hopefully it was sort of raising the profile of this particular issue.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Nidaa, for sharing. And Holly?
I think all of the panelists have kind of explained the issue really well, and I kind of agree with all of you to some extent. But I think if I can just disagree with Sue slightly, I think so. If you read Tradewinds regularly, I know a lot of people don't have access to it because it is behind a paywall. So we care about two things, and that's money and people. So deals and the people behind those deals. And we have actually, in the last few years, we did actually run into a situation where there was a headline that we wrote, and it was to the effect of a woman doing womanly things who just happened to have been promoted to the head of this massive offshore services group. And we shouldn't have, I'll get into this later, I'm sure, as the discussion goes on, but we shouldn't have written that headline. And then around the same time, that kind of fed into our thinking process that we needed to really change up the way that we covered or wrote about diverse people. And I think if you've read Tradewinds over the past couple of years, you'll have really seen that the way the newspaper is structured and some of the stories that we now do is completely different to what we did before. But it was a huge learning curve for us. And what we had to do was, Tradewinds is very, we've always kind of done the same thing, and very successfully, I might add. And our sort of formula of money and people has been, very popular. But we had to find a way of working in stories about not so much the issue and importance of the diversity as a topic, because I think that's well understood, but highlighting diverse people as well as talking about these issues and recruitment issues and all the rest of it. So what we now do as much as possible is that we try to profile people who have diverse identities. Maybe you're a woman in a certain job, or for example, I interviewed earlier this year a lady who understood herself to be the first Black female chartering manager for a tanker company. And I published that story, and out of the woodwork, I got loads of emails saying, no, she's not the first. There's this person, there's this person, there's this person. So it's been kind of a learning curve. And even though I take Sue's point that we shouldn't just be, highlighting people for the identities that they have, I think as we go on this journey and trying to get better at, highlighting the maritime as the diverse industry that it actually is, sometimes it's more important to represent people and have that representation within our pages, and just to show people what's possible and who else is out there. And I'm sure that will evolve as we go along. But at this point, that's what we're trying to do, and trying to give, and also trying to give those people a platform, because a lot of these people we speak to have a lot to say on the topic of diversity. So it's also about exploring their perspectives as well. When we do these profile pieces, which we have tried to work into Tradewinds, the publication, just kind of organically, and we're trying to develop a more natural approach to representing all the different kinds of people who work in shipping and maritime, and that will change and evolve as we go along. So I think in terms of, is the shipping press doing enough to represent women? We're probably not doing enough, but I can speak for Tradewinds and say that we are certainly trying to make a concerted effort, to the degree actually where our news editor will count the number of stories that we've done where we've not mentioned a woman or had a picture of a woman or whatever. So it really does matter to us. But again, some of the obstacles we come up against, as Nidaa and the rest of the panel have highlighted, is sometimes you can't find those women to speak to. And that's again why, if I do a story about dry bulk markets, which is what I cover, and I can't find a female shipbroker to talk to, so I will have to write a story where I just speak to all men. It's completely usual, So again, it's kind of a good thing that we have this in-house regular rolling features featuring people of diverse identities in order to get that into our pages, because otherwise it'd be really difficult. I hope that makes sense.
Definitely makes sense. And I very much like that approach, because I agree with Sue. We need to stop saying that it's a woman captain, it's a woman this. So it's quite interesting the way that you are dealing with it. And thank you actually for sharing an example of where a title goes wrong in the press, because that leads me perfectly into my next question. Not only did they referred to this lady as a woman, they also referred to as a grandma. I don't know if you're familiar with the example of when, and we do see this when women assume key roles. They're usually portrayed in the media not for the professional kind of background, but for being female. So when the first female head of the World Trade Organization took on her role, one newspaper actually wrote, "This grandma is the new chair of WTO." So I think that was actually contested, and she eventually won. But do you believe that this approach is due to unconscious bias? Is it a result of trying to overcompensate and mention that it's a female and she's also a grandmother? How do you kind of perceive this kind of incidents, if I may call them that? Carleen, would you like to go first and we'll do the rounds?
Well, I'm hearing that we're talking out of both sides of our mouths. At the one side, we want women to get more prominence in the media. On the other side, we don't want to use the characteristics which make news. If it had been another man getting the job at WTO would have been a straight headline. But they pulled out characteristics about an individual that made that appointment unique. And I can understand her reluctance to be known as a grandma or to feel as though she got the appointment because she was a woman. But at the same time, we are more aware of her appointment because of those characteristics than if it had been another man. So on the one hand, it sounds as though we don't want to be known as a woman or somebody of diversity, but on the other hand, we want to make that news. So I don't believe we can have it both ways. And it depends on the treatment and how it's done. But I don't know that we can have it both ways. And if our goal is to get more diversity, if our goal is to show people that they can see themselves in an industry, then I don't know that we should shy away from promoting the fact that not only is this woman highly qualified, not only is this person highly qualified, she happens to be a woman, she happens to be a mother, she happens to be, in my case, a glamour.
Amazing. That's such an interesting approach of this question. Thank you very much for that input. Manoj, would you like to go next?
Now, on that issue, I would like to point out that, recently the International Cricket Conference, they have recently coined a term. We used to refer to them as batsman. Now it is called batter. It's called batter. They've removed that. They've made it gender neutral. All of them have been referred to as batters. There is no batsman anymore. So like that, I think, this actually is one of the perils of modern day journalism, where, headline writers tend to go overboard, and that, without having any sensibilities, they try to actually only look at, grabbing the eyeballs of the readers. So without actually knowing, the kind of damage that they are going to do for the gender, diversity issues, which is very unfortunate, that, the people who are, at the helm of doing all these things, even the editors tend to gloss over all these issues. So I think, it's patently unfair, if somebody gets a job by their own ability, to just for somebody else to say that, okay, he or she is a grandma or, XYZ, which is not a good way of looking at it. I think, we need to be conscious about the fact that, we are all on an equal footing, and I think we need to be sensible to all these issues. But sadly, because of the clickbaits and how the modern day journalism is, I think it's incumbent on all of us to be a little careful about when writing headlines. I don't know whether Nidaa or Holly do while doing stories, and I tend to give my own bylines. And as far as possible, I want the editor to pass that headline. I don't know whether you people have that the freedom to do that. But I make it a point to ensure that, whatever headline I suggest goes into the publication or, the final published article. So all of us have a role to play in that. We can push our own things. I mean, we are the people who are writing the story, and we know exactly where we are coming from, what is the context. So it's actually our right also to make it happen.
Definitely. Thank you very much, Manoj. Sue, your thoughts?
Well, if we're going to be diversity inclusive, I want to see the next headline that says Grandad is appointed as managing director of the stock exchange, because it works both ways. It's, if we're going to do it, it's about being inclusive, and inclusive means is everybody. So if they do that, I don't have a problem. If they're singling out one particular sector of the population, the female, and just highlighting them, then that's not being inclusive. So it's diversity, inclusivity that I'm saying. I'm all for having a personality behind the person and not being a cardboard cutout that you just put in the paper that's very stereotyped, and showing some of the characteristics. But as I say, it needs to include everybody. So providing they put similar headlines about other people, then I don't have a problem with it. But I do have a problem when it's singularized out, as I said before about the example I gave. But I also take Holly's point is that we're all on a journey and people are learning. And I think we have to cut some slack. And if that publication learns and doesn't do the same thing again, then actually I think it's probably really good they printed that article, because they wouldn't have learnt without it. So I think it's all part of, we're all on the journey together and we're all learning. I mean, you know, I'm learning all the time. I'm not nowhere near perfect in my gender diversity and the way I speak and the things I do. And I'm quite happy for somebody to call me out or call me in or whatever you want to call it today. So I think it's about respect. And if the person they're writing about is offended, whatever that is not acceptable. So if they were doing a headline like that and I was the journalist, I would have phoned them up and said, are you comfortable with me saying this? Because they must have known there was a chance that that person could be offended. So I think it's about, let's go on this journey together. When somebody does make a mistake, is honestly point it out in a courteous way, in a way that makes them understand that we understand it could be a genuine mistake, but have they thought about the other side? And let's help each other on this journey to actually be much more inclusive and aware of each other's sensibilities and feelings and thoughts.
Definitely. Thank you very much, Sue. Nidaa?
Yes, as my fellow panelists said, I mean, I totally agree with it. You know, I wasn't sure what was the thinking behind that headline. I mean, it could have been unconscious bias or overcompensation, or it could have just been trying to grab a headline. I think, you know, we ought to focus on the achievements, not a person's gender. So, for example, I recently wrote a story about a new chief executive at South Carolina Ports Authority. She was appointed, this is Barbara Melvin I'm talking about. She was appointed, and well, we wrote the story not just because she was the first female to hold this position, which is groundbreaking in itself and a step change, but because she had risen to that position, you know, having worked through various roles for more than 20 years, including in operations. She was most recently Chief Operating Officer. So it was a story about a new head at one of the top 10 ports in the US, replacing someone who was retiring after 13 years, rather than, you know, a story just based on, you know, on her being female. So I think, you know, headlines are important, and the headline that I went with when writing the story was just about, you know, South Carolina Ports elects new chief as, you know, the old person, Newsom, steps down, which was accepted by the editors. So that was good. And we didn't try to sort of push the gender agenda. We just, you know, wrote the story for what it was.
Thank you. Thanks, Nidaa, for that, for sharing that. And Holly, some thoughts on this?
I think that in the case of this this headline, this grandma is the new chair of the WTO. To me, there's, as Manoj said, it's just, it sounds a bit clickbaity to me, because there's actually nothing remarkable about a grandma, or a grandparent, I should say, becoming the head of something as huge as the WTO, because surely those people at a certain age anyway, you know, plenty of people who've held that position previously are going to have grandkids by that stage. So that's why, for me, it kind of smacked of sexism, because I think there was, or for me at least, tell me if you agree, but there was kind of a negative connotation about being a grandma, as if that's not what grandmas do. Grandmas sit by the fire and look after the kids and make everyone laugh, you know? So that's kind of what it was for me. And, you know, it would have been a good headline if it was something remarkable, like this nuclear physicist became the new chair of the WTO or something like that. That's when those kind of headlines work. But the situation that we found ourselves in was, when we wrote this headline that I mentioned previously, was a bit more nuanced. And personally, this is just my opinion, and other people on my team probably disagree. We shouldn't have gone with it. So the lady had a side career as a yoga teacher, and she had a yoga channel on YouTube. But in her business career, she was also wildly successful, and she had an MBA from a top business school, and she'd worked her way up. It also helped that her dad was the chairman of this services group. So there was that element as well. And I think the headline we wrote was something about a yoga teacher becomes CEO. It was something like that, probably phrased a bit better. And would we have run that same headline if it was a man? Actually, we might have done, because it was kind of so unusual that this person would have a side career doing yoga. However, what we should have been probably more aware of is the fact that yoga has perceptions, or is linked to people's perceptions of the kind of people who do yoga. And in the West, it's usually women, in kind of middle-class women, or rich women, whoever. I don't know, I think that's where it came from, and a lot of people had a problem with that. And I think we, especially considering this woman had such a illustrious career outside of what is essentially her hobby, we shouldn't have led with that in the headline, I don't believe personally. But it was an interesting one, and I think the journalist who wrote it, and also the editor who kind of waved it through, just weren't thinking about what kind of if there could be any kind of negative connotation attached to yoga teacher becomes chief exec. I think that was a very instructive experience for us, to be looking out for these things that they can be read a certain way, but also, I mean, it was just a really difficult one, because if it had been a man with this separate career doing some something like yoga, we probably would still put it in the headline, but it wouldn't have read the same way, it wouldn't have had the same message behind it. So I think that there is probably a bit of unconscious bias, but you have to be aware of it, not only among the person writing that headline, but also being present among the people reading it as well, I think is my point. And it's good to highlight people who are remarkable people getting those top jobs. But I think you just have to be very careful about highlighting what we think is a remarkable identity, because there are so many different life experiences, or identities that people can hold that can be kind of misconstrued. I hope I'm making sense, but I think it's a two-way thing. It's about the people writing and framing the article, but also you have to be aware of how this could be received as well. And I think
definitely it makes sense, and it's quite interesting actually. I'm very happy to have these different perspectives on board today, from the PR and communication side and from the writing side. It's very interesting. I know you've more or less all touched upon this next question, so it would just probably be a brief addition or something you would like to highlight. But what more could be done to showcase women as role models in the media? Carleen, back to you.
Well, I'm going to go back to the Sheryl Sandberg book, Lean In, where she said that women don't come forward and promote their own value, their contributions, their worth. Women, I think it's important for women to recognize all of those and be willing to discuss them. I mean, both Ninja and Holly said a lot of women just aren't willing to come forward with their stories. And it's, you know, again, we can't have it both ways. You can't have the visibility without being willing to be in the arena. So I really do believe that we have an opportunity to really be recognized for the contributions we're making to an industry that we all love. And I think we should not be reticent about that. Now, having said that, again, you know, I'm not even I'm not even a cancer. I don't usually look at both sides, but recognizing that, I imagine that a lot of women are reluctant to come forward because it is a risk. Putting your neck out, and I know this firsthand, is a risk. And it's one that a lot of people aren't willing to take. There have been times when I have accomplished something, but attribute it to others because I wanted the issue to be appreciated, not the people behind it. And I felt that the issue was better served by having someone else. And I'm not necessarily saying a man, but I felt the issue was better served by having someone else be perceived as the lead. So taking a risk is something that that is part of the gamble by coming forward, and you have to be cognizant of that.
I fully agree with that. I've also seen it from my personal experience when I do interviews for It's All About Shipping, that women are always so reluctant that there has not been a man yet who has said, no, I don't want to talk. So it's quite interesting to see. Manoj?
Yeah, so I fully agree with Carleen there. You know, in an age where, you know, you do little and then you browbeat and, you know, you make such a huge, boasting about it. I find, you know, the couple of cases here in India, they're extremely shy people, not at all media savvy. They like to work and then silently, you know, do their duty. I think somewhere down the line, this cultivation of the media is also very important, that you need to, I mean, I've seen males, you know, going out of their way to, you know, cultivate the media. And so it comes in handy. It's a two-way street. You know, I get a story and, you know, he gets some publicity. Likewise, I think, you know, women who are in leadership roles, they should come forward and, you know, start having a good rapport with the media. Building a rapport with the media is very important. I'll tell you when that helps, because God forbid if there is an adverse event and then the media goes hammer and tongs against the top leaders in the company. So if you have a healthy relationship, I can appreciate the context in which things have come, you know, and you know, this issue had happened. And I will be in a better position to look at it empathetically and, you know, put it in the right context. It is very important that we all have a healthy relationship, you know, to and fro. But unfortunately, I'm finding that, you know, it's not happening here in India. After they rise to that roles, they suddenly tend to go into a cocoon. So I don't know. I think, you know, it is basically shyness, or, you know, if they have risen to top roles, I don't see any reason why they can't answer tough questions from the media, because they have come to occupy that position on the basis of their abilities, not by any other means. So, and they are on top of what the company is doing. They're fully aware of what's going on. I don't see any reason why they should shy away from facing the media's tough questions or whatever it is. You know, it sometimes backfires. I think, you know, in some situations it really backfires on you, and you know, that is the reason why I think, you know, you should come forward and, you know, you face the media and then try and project. Then that gets amplified in the media that, you know, you broke no nonsense and you're you're the toughest of, you know, the leaders out there. So I think, you know, they should also look at media relations as a very important tool in furthering the cause.
Definitely. Exactly. And Sue?
I think this is multifaceted, and it depends what we're trying to achieve. If we're looking to show role models that women are at the top jobs and doing the top positions, and the visibility is really important. And that's why Maritime UK set up our speaker bank, so that we had people. So as Holly and everybody had said, that it's hard to find people. So we put together the speaker bank of now close on 100 women that are prepared to speak and be spoken to. And Worcester International are going to look at rolling this out as a global initiative to take across the world. So there'll be a complete database of people that are willing to speak and are approved by their company, because let's face it, there are certain companies that won't allow their male or female people to talk. That's a company policy. But I think there's another side to this, which is actually showing a diverse industry. And that isn't, as I said before, singling out particular people, but showing just generally in our way we write that this industry is an inclusive industry. So it's not just about the leadership or exceptional people, but when you're talking about teams and things like that, it's highlighting that there are some really good mixed crews now on ships that are working really well, that are harmonious, but they don't stand out because there's nothing wrong. I mean, it's always the case that somebody wants the thing where a woman's treated badly, or somebody with a, of a different religion is treated badly. So they highlight the negative, but we don't highlight when something's really harmonious and working well and how that benefits. And the number of times I've heard stories about diverse crews being happier crews, being more productive crews, more humour on the ship. Those aren't the stories that get told. And then that is in our end to try and get those stories out there, whether it's through mainstream media or whether it's just through now using online platforms. There's some fantastic opportunities through the TikToks, through the Facebook, to get these just everyday stories out there so people can see this is an industry that embraces everybody. You don't have to be special, you don't have to be exceptional to get to the top. And that's the only way you can survive in this industry, because it's about all of us being involved in this industry. So I hear a lot is that women say to me, but I'm not exceptional. I'm not somebody that's done something different. I just do my job and I do it well, but that's who I am. And I think until we embrace the fact that we show this, you're not going to get people that are going to then see the industry for what it is. Because if all we say is that we want exceptional women that are going to be the CEOs of the companies, you're not going to attract the people into this industry.
Exactly. Thank you so much, Sue, for that. Nidaa and Holly?
I'm not sure there's much I could add to what everyone else has said, but I guess sort of one avenue could be, women on panels, conferences and events. I mean, I've mentioned in previous webinars that, some companies, wouldn't want to participate in any event if there wasn't a female present. And while that worked for a little amount of time, it sort of fizzled out due to the sort of lack of available sort of panelists. But it's good that Worcester through the sort of contact book should help in that endeavour. So that's kind of one way in which to sort of help improve it. And while things have improved from ages ago, where a colleague of mine, worked in the industry for 20 years and only interviewed 6 women. I've interviewed probably more than that in my 6 years in maritime. So yeah, I guess, one way of doing it is just writing about those who are, doing things within the industry, whether it's is an executive, in a top job at a, top company, or whether it's, a captain on a ship, who's sort of made it there through, hard graft. So I guess, yeah, just highlighting these kinds of stories, being involved in panels, conference panels, is another step forward where this can be improved.
Thanks so much, Nidaa, for that. And Holly, Would you also like to share your thoughts?
I've been thinking I think for a long time, probably all of my career actually, I've kind of had a problem with, well, not a problem, but it can be a source of frustration as to how let's say resistant to change the shipping media is, and how it's changing now, of course, but for a long time has just continued to do what it's always done, and that's fine, so we'll just do more of it. So I was making a joke to some friends that you know what I'm gonna do? I'm gonna make a shipping publication that's by women, for women. And because, you know, it's a male-dominated industry, and the shipping press for so many years has itself been male-dominated to a degree as well. And we've got to this place where everything's kind of a bit staid and a bit traditional. I want to do something to shake it up. And, you know, of course, this conversation was happening in a bar. And I of course, I'm never going to do it. But I think in terms of, I really feel strongly that something needs to be done to shake up the shipping media. And that can be done in a number of ways. And you see people like Lloyd's List doing podcasts, which is an amazing idea, increased adoption of video, for example. But in terms of how that factors into how do we improve, how do we highlight women as role models, showcase them as role models, you know what I would read, and I would read it from cover to cover, and unfortunately I don't know if it's a good fit for Tradewinds at this point, is I would love to just do interviews with female CEOs where we don't talk about shipping. I would love to just talk to them about what are your top tips for how do you stay productive? What do you do? Do you let's think, how do you solve problems? How do you know, and talk about this kind of like Harvard Business Review type journalism, which I think people are leaning more towards these days as well, of really digging down into these of what makes a person successful. Because I think if I was to do that same interview for Tradewinds, we would have to talk about the company and their aims and what we're going to see them next, and you know, their deals or whatever. But actually, I would love to, and I think it would be a really good way of as Sue says, you know, showing people it's possible and helping people, especially women, believe that they could also get to that level, is just learning from these leaders about what they do. You know, do you work for 50 minutes and then take a 10-minute break, for example? If Angeliki Frangou said she did that, I would do that, and it might help me feel more motivated to try and, I don't know, just if she can do it, I can do it, you know.
Sure.
So I don't know, I think it's also about coming up with ideas and being better at portraying personalities, but also better at portraying people's personal expertise as well, because if you make that accessible, then that will have an effect on readers, particularly younger readers who are kind of lower down the career ladder as well, and perhaps need some motivation or some inspiration as well. So I really hope that we can see the shipping media continue to evolve, and of course I would love to play a part in that as well. But I think that's how we'll do it, is you know, what makes someone so special? Let's go and find out and tell that story.
Perfect. As long as we're having these discussions, I think we are on a more positive path. Being a bit time conscious and that we are running out of time, and it was difficult to get you all from different jurisdictions together, I'll kind of combine my two last points for some thoughts and as a concluding rather remark. This is a rather serious issue that has seen the light of media recently. We have seen some cases in the past, but this seems to be taking on dimensions. So we have seen disturbing stories such as obviously Midshipman X rape. And I would like to know your take on such stories being public, the kind of impact you feel they have on women, the way in which they should be reported. And then on another final note, because you all did touch upon how women are not so comfortable maybe talking to the media, if some advice that can be given, I guess, to the women when talking to media or in these situations.
Well, I'm happy to go first on this, because this is a topic that was has been much in the discussion at least in the States, if not globally, in the last couple of weeks, where Midshipman X came forward and said that she was on her C term from one of the maritime academies, and she came forward with the fact that she'd been raped during her C term. It further was revealed that 5 out of the 50 women in her class had also been raped. So that's 10% of her class. Now, we have 6 state academies and 1 federal academy. So if you're talking about 7 maritime academies, I don't know what the percentages are, and if they all have C term, you're talking about 35 women being raped in one C term, let's call it. And there is a school of thought that we shouldn't be talking about it. This is too difficult. It'll cast a bad light on the industry. But a similar event happened 5 years ago. And the institution, its alumni organization, its parents association, swept it under the rug. So we're 5 years down the road. And let's assume that 35 women were raped each year during C time. Well, I think you can all do the math on that. And this is just in the United States educational system for maritime. This doesn't account for the women that are already at sea. This doesn't account for shoreside, for sexual assault and sexual harassment shoreside. I will share that I have come forward with my own story of being sexually assaulted in this industry. Now, I prefaced my remarks at the top of the hour with how much I love this industry. And I hate the word victim, so I'm going to call myself a survivor. But I do not accept the fact that that is what defines our industry. But we cannot put it under the rug yet again so that in 5 years, we're telling the same story. It is a travesty that Midshipman X endured what she endured. Because if something had been addressed 5 years ago, she might have been spared, along with her other cadets, along with the hundreds of women who have been sexually assaulted or sexually harassed, either on board or ashore. It needs to stop. And we need to talk about it. We need to reveal it. We need to eradicate it. But pushing it under the rug is not the answer. So I encourage the press, I encourage companies to have the conversations, difficult as they are, have the conversation. Because if we don't bring it out from under the rug, if we don't reveal how this does hurt our industry, we're doomed to repeat it. And we have too fine an industry to allow this blot on it to persist.
Thank you so much, Carleen, and thank you for sharing that with us. So
I just want to add one more thing, is that I am very proud that I'm a member of WISTA USA, because WISTA USA has written a letter stating its resolve to bring the issue forward. And I'm proud that WISTA USA has done this.
thank you.
I agree with Carleen. We can't brush it under the carpet, and the more we do that, the more women we are allowing this to happen to. But I also think it's something that's universal. We've heard of it in the film industry and various other industries.
Mm-hmm.
And I think more important is, how does the maritime industry deal with it? And how does it behave to stop it going forward, and what its behavior is? So there are a number of sites now, like Safer Waves and things like that, where these stories are coming out and they need to be heard. But it's also encouraging. There was a story where a woman was sexually harassed badly on a ship. She reported it to the shore. And when she got to the next port, she thought she would be taken off the ship and it'd all be swept under the carpet. And much to her surprise, the person doing it was taken off the ship very visibly and called out on the ship that his behaviour was not acceptable. It's not what the company would tolerate. And they removed him from the ship and left her on the ship with a very positive statement from the company. That person now feels much, much safer in our industry that her company respected her. They treated the situation with seriousness and they called it out on the ship that anybody else that had any ideas of doing something similar would be treated in the same way. But not only did they do that, they sent a memo to every ship that they operated and told the story and said that it would not be tolerated on any of their ships in any circumstances. That is a correct way of behaving, and that's what we should be highlighting in our media and in our press, that we will act responsibly, we'll act caringly, and we will act quickly if these situations happen. So I think we've got an opportunity as an industry now to say we're not going to brush it under the carpet, but I will say something, and I think this is maybe slightly controversial. The role of the DPA has to change. If somebody reports something to a DPA of this sort of nature, they have to be empowered to act upon it. Too many of them are frightened that they have to be the company person and that they can't act upon it. And if we have an industry where the person that you're reporting to cannot act on it because they're too scared of the culture of the company, then we do need another mechanism in our industry where these things can be reported to. So I think we need to seriously look at the training of the DPA. We need to change the empowerment of the DPA to act on situations like this, because it is an illegal situation. A rape is a rape, whether it's at sea or land, and there should be no difference. And how we treat these things and how we behave going forward and how we now bring this into things like, I think, Helm needs a major rewrite, and there should be specific training in Helm about culture and behaviour on the vessels, and that these things should not be tolerated. So I think how we respond to this and how we now behave is crucial. And if we do just brush it under the carpet, then it's not an industry or sector that I love and hope will go forward in a different way. And I'm seeing positive signs. So I think we can lead on this if we react responsibly, we act quickly, and we act with assertion. So hopefully the signs are there. The shipping company should be absolutely applauded for the way they behaved. And that's the type of stories I think should be headlines, front page, that company behaved in that way, because that gives out the signals that it should be.
We'll go on to the discussion with Manoj now. What are your thoughts on this very serious case we have seen the light of media? And we would really like to hear your input.
Actually, there is absolutely no doubt whatsoever that such incidents needs to be called out, But having said that, I think the shipping industry has a bounden duty to put in place mechanisms where such things don't recur. Because I'll tell you why. We are at a time when we are trying to promote women crew, girl cadets into the industry. And in a country like India, where, this kind of issues, creates a lot of, uncertainty and, ill will. And that dampens whatever we are doing to promote gender diversity in shipping. Because if people will be afraid to join this industry, So I think, it's high time that, we put in place measures to ensure that such things don't happen. We have been talking about that, okay, when it comes, we will do this, when it comes, we will do that. But first and foremost, there has to be, foolproof mechanisms to ensure that things like that don't recur. That is very important. And, people who have indulged in such things, I think they need to be brought to justice quickly so that, people are discouraged in doing that.
Definitely. Thank you so much for Manoj for your thoughts on that. Nidaa, and then we go on to Holly as we wrap up today's very interesting panel.
would say, you know, that speaking out is immensely powerful. You know, just look at the Me Too movement and sort of, you know, how the perpetrators there, you know, were brought to justice. So it is, you know, and, you know, as devastating as, you know, the stories are, they definitely should be reported, because it does raise awareness. And it does sort of highlight, you know, steps the industry, maritime industry, you know, should be taking, you know, to address these things. You know, it's vitally important, you know, to highlight these issues, you know, whereby something isn't working, you know, perhaps, you know, collaboratively, you know, we can work together in order to, you know, as Manoj said, you know, try and, you know, prevent, you know, this sort of behavior, you know, going forward. It's great, you know, what Sue said about the company that really disciplined, you know, perpetrators in, you know, in that case, and that does send us a signal, you know, that this is unacceptable. And although, you know, it does sort of maybe put, it might deter sort of young female talent from, you know, from joining the industry. You know, they have to know that, you know, there are many, many more people and companies out there that have good working practices, and that do treat everyone, you know, equally and with respect. It's just a few bad apples, you know, that sort of, you know, tarnish the industry. But I would say that, you know, these types of stories, you know, should be treated, you know, with care and sensitivity. Because they are obviously, you know, quite emotional stories, you know, for the victim or survivor. Yeah, I think that definitely, you know, it's you know, speaking out will encourage, you know, other people to do so, and, you know, perhaps we'll see some positive change as a result.
Hopefully, yes. And I truly do hope that the example that Sue mentioned will be making headlines in, since you all write in the maritime media and all of your publications. That would be great to see. As you said, these are the stories that we need to highlight to encourage people to not be scared to go on board. And last but not least, of course, Holly, before we wrap up for today.
I think the thing about the shipping industry is that no one wants to be the first mover in anything. And unfortunately, that also applies to showing leadership in it's, I mean, I wanted to call it a new area. It's not, it's a new this huge area of concern that has been hitting the headlines recently, and hopefully some action will be taken to deal with it so that it never happens again. I think in which case, we perhaps as shipping journalists, the role that we can play is, as Sue highlighted, telling stories about how effective leadership can be taken in these situations, what has worked for other companies, in which case, you know, anyone watching this conference session, if you have an example of how that's being done, then please give us that story, because we will tell it. Because we need to keep this narrative about this problem of sexual harassment, sexual abuse at sea going, but also what's being done to tackle it as well. I think it's incredibly important to tell the stories of the victims respectfully, as Nida's explained. And actually, I think I'm writing an article on this at the moment, actually, funnily enough, and a number of victims actually were convinced to come forward with their stories and seek support based on what they'd gone through, because they had read other survivors' stories online and in the media, and it made them realize that what they had gone through wasn't their fault, wasn't to be a source of shame, and that the trauma that they had been experiencing since the incidents needed addressing. So I think there's actually, in reporting this stuff, that we can actually help play a small role in helping other survivors find support as well as highlighting, you know, as I mentioned, what can be done in terms of leadership. And also, I think I mean, regarding Midshipman X, Maersk Line has said that it's conducting an investigation. we need to know what happens as a result of that investigation. There was another case about a captain who is in danger of losing his license because he was sexually harassing his crew at the time he was chief mate. I think we as journalists need to make sure we follow that up and illustrate what happens as a consequence of people's actions. People need to know that they will be held accountable for their actions. And hopefully, you know, there will be some kind of repercussions for those people who've perpetrated these crimes. Because if we can tell those stories and reach a wide audience with that, then hopefully that will deter other people from thinking that they can get away with it. So I think as storytellers in the shipping media, we have a role to play, not just in portraying the victims, but also what can be done, what should be done, and what has already been done regarding the people who perpetrate these crimes.
Thank you so much, Holly. So very true what you're saying, and it's very encouraging to be seeing these discussions. There is a lot of power in the media to give this industry the dignity that it does deserve. So I think that this kind of discussions and initiatives always, you know, bring on more positive results. Having said that, unfortunately, even though this discussion has been so interesting and so enlightening, we do have to wrap up due to time constraints. Thank you very much, Holly, Nidaa, Manoj, and of course to Sue and Carleen for being with us today. A big thank you once again to Sanjam and her amazing Maritime SheEO team for this initiative, of course, definitely putting a positive light on the diversity issue within maritime. And thank you to everybody who participated today. I was Gina Panayotou, and we were discussing women in media and why media plays an important role to highlight female role models. And I hope you have found this panel as enlightening as I have. Thank you very much.